I'm Parker Asman, an insight crime investigator based in Mexico. Last week, we published an article analyzing new threats made by the administration of US President Donald Trump to impose tariffs on a number of goods imported into the country from Canada, China, and Mexico. It marked the first real showdown between Trump and Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's recently elected president, over bilateral issues like irregular migration and the flow of deadly synthetic drugs, especially fentanyl. As many debated the potential economic and political implications of the threat, Insight Crime focused on the impacts for organized crime and whether the sanctions would do anything to disrupt the migrant smuggling and fentanyl trafficking networks operating in Mexico. Here's that story: why Trump's tariffs won't slow the flow of migrants or fentanyl from Mexico. Read by me, Parker Asman. Fresh threats of tariffs from the US government may prove counterproductive in combating migrant smuggling and fentanyl trafficking networks, and could empower the very organized crime groups they seek to weaken. In an executive order released February 1st, US President Donald Trump declared what he called an economic emergency and announced his administration would impose 25% tariffs on nearly all goods imported from Canada and Mexico, and a 10% duty on those imported from China. Trump said the tariffs aim to spur further action from the Mexican, Canadian, and Chinese governments to combat flows of illegal drugs and unauthorized migrants into the United States. The sustained influx of illegal aliens and illicit opioids and other drugs has profound consequences on our nation, read part of the White House's statement. The tariffs against China are scheduled to go into effect on February 4th. The proposed tariffs on Canada, however, were paused for 30 days after President Justin Trudeau agreed to reinforce the border and declare Mexican crime groups as terrorist organizations. Trump and Mexico President Claudia Sheinbaum also agreed to a number of actions that postponed the planned tariffs against Mexico for a month. Among other things, the Mexican government said it will send 10,000 members of its National Guard to the US-Mexico border to help prevent migrants and drugs, primarily fentanyl, from entering the country. For its part, the United States committed to working to stem the flow of high-powered weapons into Mexico, which come from its legal gun industry, and help arm the criminal groups they want to combat. However, Mexico's National Guard has been there for years now, alongside thousands of troops already deployed to the country's northern border with the United States. The force was initially sent there in 2019 by Sheinbaum's predecessor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, to tackle migrant flows following similar tariff threats made by Trump during his first presidency. While the threat of sanctions may achieve some symbolic, short-term victories for the Trump administration, such as these security deployments, it falls short of addressing the underlying drivers of organized crime, and it fails to undermine two of their most profitable criminal economies. It's not about immigration, and it's not even about security. Gladys McCormick, a professor at Syracuse University who specializes in US-Mexico security relations, told me in an interview, "This is ostensibly all about politics and political theater." Will tariffs make migrants more vulnerable to organized crime? The United States has for years relied on anti-immigrant policies that have made migrant smuggling more lucrative for the criminal networks that offer such services to desperate and vulnerable people searching for a better life. Using the threat of tariffs to compel the Mexican government to further aid that crackdown will only bolster those criminal operations by making it harder for migrants to reach the United States. Tariffs will hurt the Mexican economy, McCormick told Insight Crime, which will further weaken the Mexican system and the rule of law. And that's going to make Mexico much more vulnerable to further incursions from organized crime. Mexico's organized crime groups are now deeply involved in almost every facet of the migrant economy. While transnational drug trafficking networks like the Sinaloa and Gulf cartels have expanded their system of taxing human smugglers, transporting migrants through areas they control, other regional groups are extorting and kidnapping migrants at every step of the journey. This is despite the increased militarization that occurred under past administrations in Mexico. Since the National Guard formed in 2019, its members have been deployed to both the northern and southern borders to assist in detaining migrants. In just the first 8 months of 2024, Mexican officials apprehended nearly 1 million migrants across the country, more than 3 times the total number detained in all of 2023, according to official data. But neither this militarization nor tariffs will do anything to address the variety of factors pushing migrants to flee their homes in the first place, such as economic instability, violence, climate change, and food insecurity, among others. Instead, tariffs would put further financial strain on the Mexican companies actually employing people at home. What's more, the tariff threat comes as the Trump administration is closing off legal pathways for immigration into the United States, further pushing vulnerable migrants directly into the hands of organized crime groups. Isn't tackling synthetic drugs a transnational issue? Mexico and China play important roles in the flow of illicit fentanyl into the United States. But tariffs failed to address the complex transnational nature of the trade and the role of the U.S. government in attacking it. Raising trade barriers between the United States and Mexico may inadvertently facilitate the flow of precursor chemicals needed to produce the deadly synthetic drug. Illicit producers in Mexico rely on the chemical industries of several countries across Europe and Asia, but China is by far the most important supplier. By creating roadblocks for U.S.-Mexico trade, Mexico may look to increase its ties with China, thus providing traffickers with more opportunities to disguise these chemicals among legal shipments. The timing of the tariff threat also raises questions. It comes as drug overdose deaths, driven primarily by illicit fentanyl, are down in the United States for the first time in a decade. A Sinaloa cartel ban on fentanyl production, as well as an ongoing internal war within that group, has also led in part to fewer seizures of the drug in both Mexico and along the northern border. That said, fentanyl trafficking has continued to evolve, and producers have adapted to these changes, as Insight Crime reported in a recent investigation, underscoring the need for a more nuanced approach to addressing the issue. I don't see any real concerted, long-term improvements that would come out of this to tackle issues of security and organized crime in Mexico, McCormick told Inside Crime. That was why Trump's tariffs won't slow the flow of migrants or fentanyl from Mexico, one of the most recent analyses produced by Inside Crime. Published February 4th, 2025, and written by me, Parker Asman. For more audio stories, podcasts, and long-form narrative journalism, be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, and YouTube. And to read more of our coverage on Mexico, migration, synthetic drugs, and organized crime in the Americas, visit insightcrime.org.